good to go. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue our look at attention. Today we're actually going to take a look at some of the hands-on experience that you got in terms of attention by taking a look at the two CogLabs that you participated in, the results of those, and taking some time out to discuss what does this all mean, what do these effects truly mean in terms of how we process and understand the world. All right, off we go. Attention. So we're going to have a very brief recap about where attention comes from, stimulus-driven versus goal-driven, exogenous versus endogenous attention. And then we're going to take up the two CogLabs that you participated in. First one being change detection, to see just how, let's face it, horrible our attention actually is. And then we're going to take a look at spatial cueing to see how our attention actually operates in terms of like characteristics of how it moves. But again, let's just do a brief recap of where our attention actually comes from. So part of the attentional process is selecting information to process, right? It's selecting what information you're going to attend to, what information you're going to spend your processing power analyzing. And as we saw last time, there's two kind of major ways that you select the stimulus that you're going to look at. One of them is called stimulus-driven attention, and it's also known as exogenous control, exo for outside, genus for generated. So this is control of your attention that is generated from the outside. And this is stimulus-driven attention, where the stimulus itself, for whatever reason, because of characteristics of the stimulus, grabs your attention in a situation. So this is the type of attention where if anybody is ever talking to you and said, oh, and then this thing just grabbed my attention, or all of a sudden something happened and I looked that way, that's an example of this exogenous type of attentional control, selecting a stimulus based on characteristics of the stimulus. The other type of attentional control is goal-directed attention. This is endogenous, endo from inside, genus generated, and this is attention that's generated from the inside, and this is when you have a specific goal, and then that requires you to select specific information. So sometimes these two types of attention interfere with each other. So if you're ever trying to study, but you're in a loud room where a TV is on, your exogenous attention is competing with your endogenous attention. So your endogenous attention is saying, I have an exam coming up, I need to study this book, I need to focus on the pages in this textbook. That's your goal-driven attention. Your exogenous attention is stimulus-driven, and it is saying, I hear loud music coming from a TV, it's trying to grab my attention, I want to focus on that. So if you ever have to pay attention, that means that you have endogenous attention from inside that you're trying to process certain information, but exogenous attention, stimulus from outside, is trying to grab your attention. All right, so that was a brief recap. On to change detection, CogLab number 1. So in this CogLab, 2 pictures were presented to you in alteration. So 2 pictures were presented to you one after another. And what your task was is you were simply asked to detect if there's a change in the picture. So are the pictures the same, or did something change between the pictures? And 50% of them were identical, and the other 50% of them had some small thing, sometimes not so small, but it had something that changed in the image. So half of them had no change, half of them did have a change, and your task was to say which ones were which. Now, there were 2 conditions in this experiment, and the 2 are no flicker and a flicker condition. And in the no flicker condition, the pictures that were alternating appeared immediately after one another, right? So as soon as, I'm doing that wrong. Here we go. They appeared one after another. So as soon as one appeared, the other one disappeared, and then back and forth. So that was the no flicker condition. In the flicker condition, there was a blank gray box that appeared in between the pictures. So one would occur, and then gray, and then another would occur, and then gray, and another would occur, and then gray, and then they alternated between the first and the second. So let's take a look at a little bit of a live demonstration. So in the flicker condition, you might have been presented with this image here, and then you would have had a gray box interposed between the two, and then you would see this image here. And your task was to indicate, is there a change? So in this case, we'll do right hand up if you think there's a change, left hand up if you think there's no change. So once you have an idea, right hand up if you think there's a change, left hand up if you think there's no change. Whoops, where am I? I lost track. All right, so this one actually has no change. This one, there's no change between the two. Let's take a look at one where there is a change. And for this one, you can just let me know what is the change as soon as you see it. So once again, this is the flicker condition where we have two alternating pictures with a gray box in between. So hands up once you see the change. A few more people a chance. All right, I see most people get it. So what's the change? The lamp. So this lamp here disappears in the second alteration picture. And this is what I mean by not a small change. So that lamp is by no means some distant person in the background that is a very small part of the picture. That's actually quite a large portion and quite a prominent portion, very central. It's literally in the center of the picture. And then a large lamp disappears from the image. So that was the flicker condition. So now let's take a look at the no flicker condition. So in this case, we're going to see two images alternating, no gray box between the two. And in this case, once again, we'll do put your right hand up if you see a change, put your left hand up if you see no change. So let's alternate between the two. Yeah, so this one is very apparent, very quick. So it's really easy to see that that little girl is missing in one picture and reappears in the other picture. And then that would be an example of change, and then this one would be an example of no change, where you alternate between the two pictures, and it is very clear, very evident that there is nothing changing between these two images. So what were the results of the experiment? So we've had kind of like an in-class experience of this. What were the actual results? So here we have a graph of the results. So this is the two conditions. So this is the flicker condition, where there's that gray box between the two images. This is the no flicker condition, where the gray box is not there. And then this is proportion correct. So this is whether or not you correctly identified it as a change, if it was a change, or if you correctly identified it as no change, if there was no change. So higher bars are better performance. So in the flicker condition, we have that performance. So in the flicker condition, we were at about just under 70%. Now, you might say, oh, 70%, not so bad. However, remember that 50% is chance, right? If you were blindfolded doing this challenge, doing this CogLab, if you were doing the bird box challenge while you were doing the CogLab, you could get 50%, because it's either change or no change. You're right 50% of the time. So in the flicker condition with the gray box, you're not doing very well. You're just slightly above chance. If we take a look at the no flicker condition, you can see that the accuracy goes up to almost perfect performance. So you're above 90% correct in the no flicker condition. You are way more accurate in the no flicker condition than you are in the flicker condition. So this is an increase in accuracy. And one thing that we're not going to spend too much time on, but I will mention here, is oftentimes in studies like this in cognitive psychology, we use multiple measures to test performance, because sometimes it's possible for people to manipulate their performance in one measure by sacrificing another measure. And this is an example of that. So we have an increase in accuracy in the no flicker condition, but this increase in accuracy might have come at the cost of reaction time. So maybe for some reason, because of the way our minds work, we just naturally, instinctively take more time in the no flicker condition, right? So I guarantee you, if I forced you to spend 20 minutes on every single picture in the flicker condition, you would be able to get 100% accuracy, because eventually you would find that one thing that changed. So maybe the no flicker condition is more accurate because maybe we just instinctively, intuitively, naturally spend more time in the no flicker condition. Maybe flicker is annoying, and so we try to get rid of it early. We spend more time in the no flicker condition. So to answer that, is this increase in accuracy due to an increase in time spent? We can also take a look at reaction time. So here's reaction time in milliseconds. So we have 2 seconds, 4 seconds, all the way up to 14 seconds. So how long does it take people to identify or answer in the flicker condition versus the no flicker condition? And you can see that for the flicker condition, on average, you're taking about 12 seconds to decide if there's a change or if there's no change. So that's a very long time. In cognitive psychology, 12 seconds is an eternity in terms of how long this took. The no flicker condition, you took way less time. In the no flicker condition, you took about half that time, 6 seconds. So not only are we more accurate in the no flicker condition, we are actually also faster in a no flicker condition. So it's almost a double whammy of being better in this no flicker condition. Clearly, some sort of different processing is occurring in that no flicker condition. Any questions about the results for the change detection? All right, so let's take a look at some questions. So why are we so bad at detecting change? And kind of sub-questions for this. What does this indicate for how our minds actually process the world? So what does this mean for how we process the world outside? Any ideas? Any speculations? Okay, so that is one of the things that this actually suggests, that when we see things in the real world, we actually see things very broadly. We see things in very kind of broad strokes. And if you take a look at what you missed in the flicker condition, like that lamp that was right there in the middle of the picture, it kind of shows you just how broad these strokes actually are. Because we process our information in such a general way that one stimulus that is very clear to us, once we're paying attention to it, once we're specifically processing that specific area, and it's abundantly clear, nobody looked confused when I said, oh yeah, it's the light that's changing. Once I said that and switched between the two, there was not a single person in this class that said, well, I still can't see it. I don't get it. Everybody was like, oh, of course, it's completely obvious. So that means that when we're processing our world, we process it in very, very broad strokes. Now, let me ask you a kind of follow-up question to this. Does anybody feel like they process the world in very broad strokes? Do you have that intuitive sense? I'm going to take everybody's hand staying down as a no. Right? So, but kind of like introspect on this. This is why change blindness was so incredibly surprising when psychologists discovered this, because when you're going through the world and you're navigating your world and you're experiencing the world, we don't feel like we're missing information, right? We don't feel like we're not aware of things that are going on. That's why change blindness was just so surprising. That's why when you show people, oh, you're missing the light, the lamp in the lamppost, they're like, oh my gosh, how could I possibly miss that? Because as you go through the world, you have that illusion of knowing. Remember we mentioned the illusions of learning. Well, you have the illusion of awareness too. We are not very aware of the world that we are living in and experiencing, other than what we're paying attention to at a particular time. So that was one of the surprising things about how we actually process the world. The answer is very little, but we have this illusion of being aware. So, any ideas about what this implication had for artificial intelligence? What was this sort of realization about how little of the world we process an important step in developing artificial intelligence systems?
It could limit the amount of processing that has to happen if you're able to kind of filter out the stuff that doesn't change and just look for the change that happens. You know, like when you have the non-flicker, you're not really looking at everything in the picture. You're just waiting to see that motion of something that appears and that doesn't. So maybe looking at the AI in that kind of a metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Any other ideas as part of it? Yep.
I was thinking like how if we see everything broadly, it scares me that we could make an AI that sees things much more detailed, and like what are they going to do with being able to process that well?
Well, that's a bit of a different question, but that's actually one of the things that is really fascinating about artificial intelligence, because on the one hand, we're making artificial intelligence. So oftentimes, artificial intelligence behaves very human-like. So there's already been studies where they have made artificial intelligence programs that they program in a certain way, trying to be as objective as they can, and the program ends up sexist, or the program ends up racist, right? Just because humans, I know, I can see confused faces, but if you're for example, doing an artificial intelligence program that's looking at job qualifications, right, that's reading through resumes, and you just simply say, well, here's this resume, and the computer says we should hire this person, and you say, no, you shouldn't, and then the computer updates. We'll go through how artificial intelligence is made and how these parallel processing networks are programmed, but you basically correct the computer, and then it changes its programming to make the answer more closely to the correct answer. Sometimes when humans do that, you end up programming the biases that you have into the computer program. So you'll end up with a sexist program. You'll end up with a racist program. So that's on one hand, is sometimes they think very much like us. Other times, they think completely unlike us. So there's this video game called Asteroids, which was like the second video game I think ever put into arcades, right? It's an ancient video game. People have played it forever. And there's a definite strategy that humans came up with about how to maximize, the strategy you're supposed to use for asteroids. What they did in artificial intelligence is they made a program to play asteroids. And all they did with this program was the program just randomly moved the little shooter and randomly pressed the button, right? It's almost as if you give like a very small child your video game. What are they gonna do? They're gonna button mash, right? So this program just button mashed off the beginning. And they simply had it record its score, and whatever it did, if it improved the score, it would do that more often. If the score went down, it would do that less often, right? And that's all that they had, and it would change what it does. When do I press the button? When do I, where do I move compared to where, the attacking aliens are? How do I do this? When they came back in the morning, this computer had strategies they had never seen before. It was just like playing a completely different game. So we have no idea in AI where we're going. Are we going to go with computers that think like us, in which case we kind of know what they're going to do? Or are they going to come up with completely new solutions, in which case we have no idea what's going to happen? And people are, and this is one of the things that I'm kind of a little bit skeptical about. And this is why oftentimes they'll call, for example, in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they recently started asking anthropologists to take a look at their programs. And you would say, why anthropologists? They look at bones, we're looking at the, the stars. They ask anthropologists to come in to identify human biases in communication that they have put in that would stop the search for extraterrestrial life. And you'll see those biases in artificial intelligence, because one of the things that everybody always is afraid of is that we're going to come up with an artificial intelligence and it's going to destroy everybody. You look at every science fiction story and the AI just wipes humanity out every single time. I mean, it's done it, 8 times in Terminator franchise by now, right? But that's always the move. AI always wipes them out, because humans, most of the times a human society that was technologically advanced encountered a less advanced technological human society, it has not gone very well for that less advanced technological human society. That's why aliens are always pictured as dangerous invaders. That's why AI is always pictured as the end of the world. But for all we know, we're going to develop an artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence is going to adopt us as pets and take care of us like those rich, purse poodles that everybody else has. And we're going to live the greatest lives ever in the history of humanity. The real crucial thing is nobody knows, because nobody can predict it, because it's a completely different mind. So anyways, we got off track here a little bit. But the implications that this has for AI used to fail massively. It used to be horrible. If you go back just 20, 25 years, artificial intelligence was not that good. And one of the reasons is because of the illusion that we somehow represent the entire world. The programming for AI tried to represent the entire world. And the amount of memory and processing that you need to represent the entire world was just way more than any kind of computer program could handle. Our minds can't handle it. Our brains can't handle it. So what they did is, when they saw change blindness, they said, well, wait a second, humans aren't representing the entire world. Why does our artificial intelligence system have to try to represent the entire world? And the idea that they came up with is the idea that the world is its own representation. That I don't need to code everything that's out there in here and take up valuable resources in here, because if I want to know something about the world, I can just look at the world. So for example, if I wanted to know what everybody is wearing in this classroom, I don't need to close my eyes and remember and represent what everybody's wearing. I can just look, and I can go yellow shirt, pitbull sweatshirt, striped sweater. It's right there for the taking. I don't need to commit processing power to representing that in my mind, which means that I don't have it represented. So if all of a sudden I was looking over here and somebody changed their clothes and they came back, I wouldn't know, because it was never represented. And that change blindness changed how artificial intelligence worked. Rather than trying to represent the entire world in the program, they said, no, let's just leave it out in the world. We'll have a way to sense it, and then we can use the processing power for everything else, like taking over humanity. All right, so why are you better, more accurate, and faster in the no flicker condition? So any ideas what it is in the no flicker condition? We mentioned this before a little bit. Yep.
It was like the parallel versus serial processing. You had to remember where things were and direct my attention to the no flicker stuff. I kind of could just steer past it if I noticed any flicker of anything.
Exactly. So the answer is that in the no flicker condition, you are doing this with a parallel processor. In the flicker condition, you're doing it with serial processing. So in the no flicker condition, you can see the entire picture. And if it changes, then it's immediately apparent, because you can process the entire picture looking for change. In the flicker condition, your strategy probably in the CogLab was to start looking at individual things. And you would say, let me look at this boat. No, the boat doesn't change. Let me look at this cloud. Cloud doesn't change. Maybe this person in the jeans, not that person. Maybe this person in the sweater, not that person. Maybe this car. And you go piece by piece. That piece by piece is a serial processing technique. Parallel processing, you can take a look at the whole thing, and immediately the change becomes apparent because you can process all of that information. The parallel processor that you're using in change detection is your motion processor. So motion is something that's very important for us. It's important to know whether things are moving, right? Nobody in the history of mankind, well, no, not nobody, very rarely in the history of mankind have you ever had to run away from a tree. But oftentimes you have to run away from a saber-toothed tiger. So things that move are very different from things that don't move. We have parallel processors that are dedicated to recognizing motion. So when that girl was there and then she was gone, she was there and then she was gone, right? Look at what my hand is doing. Literally the only way that happens in the real world is if somebody's moving. If something's there and then all of a sudden it's gone, it means that something moved. That triggers that parallel processor, take in the information, process it very quickly, and you can see the change. All right, so what type of attention is driving the effect? This one, just for time to make sure that we get to the spatial cueing, I'll take this one. So what type of attention is driving the effect? It completely depends upon whether you're in the flicker condition or in the no flicker condition. So if you're in the no flicker condition, it's exogenous. There is just something about the disappearing image that grabs your attention. And you don't have to have the goal to notice it. Even if I gave you no instructions for this experiment and I showed you the image of the girl there and not there, you would say, oh, what's with the girl disappearing? It just grabs your attention. That's exogenous. In the flicker condition, it's 100% endogenous. In the flicker condition, you have to say, I'm going to pay attention to this boat. No, it's not there. It's not changing. I'm going to pay attention to this lamppost. No, it's not changing. I'm going to pay attention to this tree. It's got to come from inside. You got to pay that attention. All right, so to wrap this up, we are going to take a look at this in the real world. So just as one last sort of explanation or demonstration of just how incredibly little information we process, we're going to take a look at this kind of social experiment here by Darren Brown, where we see just how little information we process in our everyday world.
Most of us think we're pretty observant, but with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted.
Excuse me, do you know how to get to Trinity Church from here? You see that church down there?
Yeah, straight through there.
And there's a big cute building down there. You see that church down there?
Yeah.
You stay on there, which is like the roadway. And then you walk down 2 or 3 blocks and Trinity Church is over by the outside. We're walking in that direction.
Excuse me, you don't have Trinity Church, is it?
Might be Wall Street and Broadway.
Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, see, I mean, yeah. It's like the Trinity Church. If you keep going that way, you'll be way all the way to the clockwise.
That seemed almost too easy, so later on I see how far I can take it.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is?
Okay. Last time I switched with someone who looked a little bit like me, but where's the fun in that?
You know, that's right here, the other side, see what that lady standing?
Sure.
That's the pool, no, the lady in the gray.
The other side.
Yeah, the other side of the
But you
pool.
say you don't know where it is.
Exactly
So-
the street, no, but it's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay?
So just to kind of point out before they keep upping the stakes here, you can tell very, very clearly nobody's noticing the change. There is no surprise on anybody's face. There's no kind of double take and questioning your own perception. In any of these, there is just an unbroken string of directions being given. They don't notice that he has gone from, the person that they're talking to has gone from one person to another. And part of this is, again, because we use the outside world as its own representation. When was the last time that you were talking to somebody and in the middle of your sentence, poof, they changed from that person to another person? it never happens, right? Unless you're talking to Batman, it never happens. So why would we need to represent very detailed the person that we're talking to? Why would we need to represent exactly what their face looks like in order to actively engage with them? The answer is we don't. We think we do, we think we might, but these demonstrations show that we just represent the individual as this is the person that I'm talking with, and as long as the change occurs to another person, it's person in person, and we don't notice the difference. So let's take a look at exactly how far it can go. And one interesting case where the person does notice.
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is? From here? Yeah, fine. Come on, take it. You want to walk down? I'm going to catch some other people. Sorry. Okay, listen, once you go on Broadway, yes. Come on, the numbers are going.
All right.
Once you hit the Broadway, you're going down.
Okay, so he noticed, but he didn't notice enough to kind of clue in on it. So what did you, let's play that back just one more time and try to kind of think about what is different about this individual.
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is? From here? Yeah, fine. Come on, take it. You want to walk down? I'm going to catch some other people. Sorry. Okay, listen, once you go on Broadway, yes. Come on, the numbers are going.
All right, so what was different about the way that he engaged with Darren Brown right off the bat? Yep.
Like more eye contact.
More eye contact? Is that, yeah? So he had more eye contact, and notice that out of everybody giving him directions, he was the only one that immediately said, oh, I'll take you, right? So this person is clearly the friendliest of the bunch, right? Everybody else was like, oh yeah, you kind of go down here, you go over there. He was the only one that was like, oh, Trinity, yeah, I'll take you, come on, let's go. So clearly for him, because of the way that he, just his personality characteristics, his traits, he processed this individual more. He paid more attention to who they were, he paid more attention to their face, to what they are, because for whatever reason, for him it was important that this individual was a specific individual, and that's why when the switch took place, he's the only one that was kind of like, whoa, wait a second, you know, something weird happened. But then notice that he still goes on with it. You know, he's not asking, well, where's the other guy? What happened to the other guy? So even though he does notice, he still hasn't processed enough to definitively say, oh yeah, no, definitely, this is another individual. Oh, actually, no, he did. He said he could have sworn it was the other guy.
Yes.
But again, we use the outside world as our representation.
That's brilliant. Thanks for your help. Excuse me. You know where Trinity Church is? Right. Where are we here? Somebody's there.
Go on. We are Brooklyn Bridge.
All right, so still no realization. And this switch especially lets you know just how little we're processing of the information around us. So this person giving directions wasn't like, oh my gosh, what happened? What's going on? Just kind of kept going. Didn't notice any changes whatsoever. And that kind of shows you the broad strokes. She did not process the race of the individual. She did not process the sexual expression of the individual. All she processed was person. Person's in front of me asking for directions. And then when the change occurred and it was another person, she couldn't detect the change because in her representation, nothing changed. It was a person and it stayed a person. And that just kind of shows you how little we actually process information in the real world. And again, this is another kind of idea that I'll mention a few times in this semester, is that your mind is as good as it needs to be, and it's as dumb as it can be. And what I mean by that is that our minds are here to survive. They're here to live in this world and thrive in this world. And they're not made to be super information processes. So they're made to do the least amount of work possible so that we can be the most successful that we can be in this world. And if we lived in a world where people's identities change all the time, if we lived in a world where you could be talking to somebody and then poof, they would change into somebody else, then our minds would have evolved and developed to notice that change, because that change would be important. But we don't live in a world where that occurs. I'm looking at 30 people in this room, and none of you have changed into somebody else in the last 3 weeks that we've been together. It just doesn't happen. So our mind doesn't dedicate resources to that. And things like what we just saw in change blindness, that's the way that psychologists discover that, oh my gosh, that's what our minds are actually doing. There's a hand up? Yep.
What if you would have changed clothes? Do you think then the person would have noticed?
It's the easy answer for that is the person would notice if they processed his clothes. Whether or not they would have processed his clothes is another question. That would be like an empirical question that you would have to test. But on that note, one of the interesting things that they have discovered in change blindness is that it's a great way of showing what it is that you process. And one of the things that they found is that we tend to process more in more detail people that we identify as part of our group, and we tend to process less people that we identify as not part of our group. So when they did this experiment, and they used they asked directions from students, and they asked directions from more like student-aged individuals, and then more elderly population. What they found is that if the person that was asking for directions, if it was a student that got swapped out for another student, students were more likely to notice a change. Elderly individuals were not. If it was an elderly person asking for directions and they got swapped out with another elderly person, students were less likely to notice a change. Elderly people were more. Because when you identify somebody as part of your group, then you process them more. And this might be part of the reason, just to kind of apply this a little bit further, why things like racism and sexism are so easy to develop, and why oftentimes it's easy to apply broad strokes to out groups, whereas you take finer strokes with your in groups, because when you process out groups that you're not a part of, that are not part of your community, you process them less. You're less likely to notice changes. You're less likely to notice the differences. And that's why it's much easier to say, well, all those people are the same, right? They're all like this and they all do that. Versus, well, all of my people, we're very different. You know, like we all have differences, but those people, they're all the same. It's kind of built in to how we process. We don't process some of the details for people outside of our categories. Oh, yeah, okay, so I jumped it. I jumped the question. So again, how might this affect racism, sexism, fake news, conspiracy theories? Basically, the answer for this is that if something is part of your group, then you will process it in a more detailed manner. You will pay more attention to it. You will process it in a more detailed manner. If it's outside of your group, you will process it in a less detailed manner, making more broad strokes. So that can help explain racism and sexism. In terms of fake news or conspiracy theories, this is again something that is occurring now. It's becoming more and more important. And change blindness can help us understand that as well, because oftentimes what keeps going on with fake news and conspiracy theories is that people will seek out information that confirms what they know, and they will not pay attention to information that disconfirms what they know. They will be more likely to process information that comes from their group, and they're less likely to process information coming from outside their group. And this is one of the reasons why in things like Facebook, you get those echo chambers, and you will pay a lot of attention to people that you identify as like you. These people are part of the same group. These people are part of the same subreddit. They're like me, so I'm going to process that information more. But all the counterexamples, you know, all the people that think the Earth is round, you know, those people, you know, I'm not going to process that information as much because they're outside the group, And that helps to promote these conspiracy theories and fake news. All right, so that was actually a really kind of in-depth discussion. I quite enjoyed that. The side effect of that is we don't have time right now to go through spatial cueing. So what we're going to do is we are going to cover this. This is going to be on exam number 1. We will do this next class. So next class we'll start up with spatial cueing. We'll finish off our look at attention. And then we're going to start up on the new stuff for perception. So if there's any final comments or questions, observations, anything. All right, so that's where we're going to end for today.